wrap up this topic of Islamic doctrine or Aqeedah Islamiyya with the epilogue of the Imam Ibn Balban rahimahullah ta'ala. This is kind of like the closing section of the book, if you will. So far we've been through 5 major sections of this textbook. Alhamdulillah, the book is now published and available for sale online, and all of the classes that we've done so far are also have been produced and they're available online for free. And so I'm not going to talk about every single point mentioned in the epilogue by the Imam. I'm going to pick a few of them, and then some of the topics we will circle back to at some point in another subject, usul. So first, this first section of the epilogue here, it says obligations, or it's entitled Obligations and Blind Following. The Imam, he says that obligations are 2 types, individual obligations and communal obligations. This is what is known as fardu ayn and fardu kifaya, something that we've referred to on numerous occasions in different classes. So individual obligations include that without which Islam would not be complete, right? Like just the basic fundamentals of our faith. One of its pillars, for example, or a prerequisite of something. Those are individual obligations. Everything else after that are communal obligations, in that it has to be done, but not by every single individual. The categories of both liked, meaning mustahab and or mandub, and disliked, makruh, could include everyone and could be specific, meaning they could be liked or disliked for an individual, or they could be liked and disliked for the entire community. It says whatever is required to fulfill an obligation is to an obligation. And this is kind of a principle in our faith, so long as it is within the scope of the servant's capacity. Obviously, you have to be able to fulfill an obligation first. Otherwise, you're excused from fulfilling those types of obligations. Here we're talking about blind following, or what is called taqleed. Okay? He says blind following or taqleed, and following speculation. Speculation in the Arabic language here is called dhann. Versus al-jazm, which would be like, something that is definitive. He says blind following and following speculation is not allowed for anything which requires resolution, as it does not result in it. Meaning, to make taqleed of someone or to follow speculative evidence, it doesn't result in a level of certainty that is required for certain things. For things that require certainty or resolution, blind following and following speculation are not substantial enough. It says things which require resolution are only sufficed with definitive evidence. Definitive evidence is what is known as ad-dalil al-qat'i versus ad-dalil al-dhanni. And those are terms that we would get into in greater detail in a subject like usul al-fiqh. So to kind of, illustrate this, Ibn Hamdan, he states that it is not permitted to blindly follow for anything which requires resolution, and it is not affirmed by way of speculative evidence, which we just talked about briefly. That's because blind following and speculative evidence do not result in resolution. Therefore, blind following is not permitted to substantiate one's awareness of Allah. So here is where this is important in the context of this topic. And this was something mentioned in the very, very beginning, the opening chapters of the textbook. Is it permissible to blindly follow in your belief in Allah? Or are you required to substantiate your belief in Allah with definitive evidence? So the Imam is saying, Imam Ibn Hamdan, who is the original author, and Ibn Balban, the one that summarized the treatise, they're saying that blind following and speculative evidence would not substantiate one's awareness of Allah, His oneness, and His attributes, the prophethood of His messengers, and to believe in what they delivered, etc. All those things require definitive evidence, which all morally responsible individuals are obliged to know, which of course precedes examining miracles and affirming prophethood with them. And we talked about the role and the importance of miracles and what they do. So essentially here, because everyone has been given the intellectual capacity by which these matters are affirmed, everyone is obliged to exercise their own independent judgment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed each and every one of us that is of sound mind and that is morally responsible, meaning we're mukallaf. We've reached the age of puberty and are not impeded by some type of, affliction. We have the capacity that is sufficient enough for us to arrive at a definitive conclusion that Allah is the creator of the heavens and the earth, that He is one, that He is defined by certain names and attributes, etc. That He has sent prophets and messengers, and they have delivered a message. So we are able to, by the mere fact that we're human beings, intellectual beings, we are able to come to that conclusion on our own. We don't have to follow somebody else that says, hey, there's a God, and you say, well, I like what this guy's saying, there's a God. I have no evidence, I haven't looked into anything, I don't know any better, I'm just following. And this is similar to what it's like for a scholar in Islam. It's not permissible for some of the scholars to blind follow other scholars when they have the juristic tools to use in order to arrive to their own judgment. Right? A scholar that is at a very, very proficient level, that is equipped with the tools to, have his own or her own independent, sound judgment, they can't blind follow other scholars. It's only in the absence of those tools or in the absence of an ability in some area or other in which they would defer to another scholar and just say, I follow them. So the same way goes with the basics of Islam, the foundations of our belief in Allah. He says, things which do not require resolution, only speculation, permit blind following, which is substantiated by speculative evidence. And these are like, the do's and the don'ts of our faith. Much like following a madhab or asking a scholar when you don't have the juristic tools and know-how, you don't have the savvy to conclude, like, is this halal or haram, or is this transaction permissible or not? Is it valid or invalid? You go and you ask somebody, and they give you an answer based on what they understand, and then you follow that, then that's perfectly fine. You're not required to have, in this case, you're not required to have your own definitive evidence here. Speculation is enough, and that speculation is achieved through the following of somebody that's trustworthy and capable. So definitive evidence, speculative evidence, these are of course terms that can clearly and have been clearly defined. This is not the context for that, but the Imam does have a section. He says definitive evidence is either purely intellectual, which is of various types, right? Intellectual evidence has various types. Like, he gives an example, saying, each in a pair is a consort, okay? Right, you have a pair. Each of these in the pair, there's two in a pair, and they're called a consort of a pair. Each consort has half. Therefore, each in a pair has half. Right? It's kind of like common sense, common logic. And like absolute induction, which is a general ruling based on the ruling of its specifics. And this is another technical term that is used in, the fundamentals or foundations of the Islamic law. Al-istiqra', it's what it's known as. And there's also types of this. So this is when it's absolute istiqra', al-istiqra' at-tam. And there's other types, as I said. So this particular type, then this serves as a definitive evidence. He says, or purely legal, such as the Quran, the mutawatir sunnah, and consensus, al-ijma'a, if founded upon evidence and mass transmission. He says, whatever has been reported of the sunnah or consensus via singular transmission, which results in resolution with either verbal or contextual support is just like that which has been mass transmitted. Otherwise, it's not. Meaning if it doesn't have that support, then it's not the same as being definitive. Okay, and this was the opinion of, or the conclusion of Imam Ibn Hamdan, as well as Al-Muwafiq. Though others of the madhab, Ibn al-Najjar, who kind of serves as the mainstay of usul al-fiqh, if you will, has stated that hadith reported by singular transmission is speculative at best, regardless of contextual support or any other type. Right? So there is obviously some difference there among the scholars of the school. He says, or it's a synthesis of the two, like when we say every inebriant is an intoxicant. We know that khamr is haram, right? And that's clearly stated in the Quran. Khamr is haram. He says every inebriant, which is muskir, every inebriant is an intoxicant, and every intoxicant is impermissible, and therefore every inebriant is impermissible. Right, so there's a synthesis between the two of using, some intellectual savvy as well as combining that with textual evidence. And then you arrive to a conclusion. He says speculative evidence is like what is apparent from the book and sunnah. This is Zahir al-Kitab, Zahir al-Sunnah, Zahir al-Ijma'a, right? The apparent consensus, a companion's juristic school, like a singular companion, a previous legislation, like the laws that came before, etc. These things are considered speculative. What is meant here, I believe, apparent from the book, the Quran, what is apparent from the Sunnah, apparent from the Ijma'a, means it's possible that there is another meaning to it. There are things which are just absolutely, there's no way to interpret in a different manner certain things. And then there are other things that it's possible that there could be multiple interpretations. And in the event that there could be a secondary interpretation, then that which is apparent is here, as the Imam says, speculative. So he says here, as like a, just so you understand, this introduction does not have the capacity for a more comprehensive presentation on evidence in general. So whoever would like additional information should refer to more lengthy works, right? And that's why you would go into usul. You would start getting into the different types of evidence, speculative or definitive, et cetera, and what the ramifications of those things are. He says the next part here is those who oppose definitive evidence. Whoever opposes the result of definitive evidence, which is something indispensable of Islam. Something indispensable, meaning something that Islam cannot do without. Like a fundamental belief, if you will, or a pillar. If they oppose that, they have disbelieved. If it is not something which is indispensable, they have strayed. They're considered having erred. Right? So either you've denied something fundamental and crucial, you've disbelieved, but if something's secondary, then this is considered a misguidance. The next section here is declaring apostasy, immorality, and cursing disbelievers. It says, whoever declares with conviction another to be a disbeliever who is not a disbeliever has themselves disbelieved. This is not like calling someone a disbeliever, just like, while not actually believing it, maybe you're just throwing around, epithets. You're browbeating somebody, or you're trying to like overpower them with bad words.
We're actually judging the action instead of judging the person. He's doing like this, you can call it disbelief action.
Well, here we're talking about calling the person. You're saying, وَلِيَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ يَا كَافِرٌ. Right, if you called somebody that. If you called them that just kind of like, without really believing that, it's different than actually believing it. Like you're actually saying this is a kafir, this is a disbeliever. You're basically saying this is an apostate. And there's a law that should be applied to them in that case. And so a person that does that calls somebody a disbeliever who is actually not a disbeliever, while they said it with conviction, has themselves fallen into disbelief. He says, whoever declares with conviction another to be immoral, basically calling someone a fasiq. Someone says, yeah, fasiq. If they have conviction, meaning they truly believe this person's a fasiq, while they're not actually a fasiq, then this is fisq. As opposed to just name-calling somebody, then it's different, you see? The Imam is making a distinction between the reality of the situation. He says it's impermissible to curse a specific disbeliever, though permitted to curse the disbelievers or the deniers of faith in general. Right? To point out a disbeliever and curse at them, la'an or something of that nature, it's not permitted. Right? That's for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to deal with. But in general, because that's the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has addressed the disbelievers in general, and that is permissible. The next section, the Imam, he defines some theological terms. And we've talked about these terms, al-jawhar, al-arad, al-jism. He defines some other terms that were referred to, that are in the text, however they were translated, like al-qadim, al-muhdath, al-alim, al-mustahilu li-dhatihi, al-jaiz, various different terms that you would find perhaps translated or useful in this study of doctrine as well as usul. There's a lot of things that are related to those two subjects, usul al-din and usul al-fiqh. They have some overlap in some areas. Categories of combined givens, he talks about complete opposites, he talks about differences, he talks about likenesses. Those types of things are used. And he defines these things, you can check them out in the book. He defines these things based on usul, the framework or parameters of usul al-fiqh, and not of mantiq, which is like logic, if you will. Because logic has its own approach, and usul al-fiqh does have its own approach. Sometimes there's a little bit of influence. However, what the Imam stuck to was what was found in the works of usul. Also, the definition of some technical terms he mentions in here. What is ilm and what is dhann? The difference between the two. Knowledge and, I guess, dhann is speculation or assumption. He talks about another, because this is something that's referred to in the text quite a bit. And then mentions some of the prerequisites here. And this is, I'm gonna read from this because I found this quite profound. He says, its prerequisites are reason, absence of that which is contrary to al-ilm, and the absence of doubt. So reason is the tool of discernment. Reason is like your aql, if you will. It says reason is the tool of discernment and is a natural aptitude. And like some types of instinctual knowledge, he says, it is not acquired but created by Allah, the Most High, to distinguish between man and beast, their ability to reason, prepare them to receive knowledge and manage complex thought. It is as if it is a light placed in the heart, just like instinctual knowledge of what is necessary, possible, and absurd. Puerility and the like veil it. So this is, as a parent with young kids, sometimes kids, they do things which there's no rationale behind. There's no reason, there's no logic to it. And sometimes as a parent, you can get frustrated with that, and you can become angry. But here, this is very powerful in that he says puerility and the like veil it, meaning adolescence veils reason. And it's not just adolescence, but it's adolescent-like thinking or behavior. So if someone is, they are pubescent, they are grown, but they are very adolescent in their behavior or in their thinking, then you will find that they do unreasonable things. But it's quite obvious in young kids. They haven't, as he says, it can be developed. That adolescence is like a hijab for reason. So you cannot expect. And that's why in Islam we have this issue of taklif. When do you become mukallaf? When do you become morally responsible, where you are now going to be accountable for your deeds, either by way of reward or sin? It's when the person reaches puberty. And at that point, it's expected that, they've grown up and they've matured to a point. And now they've reached a state where that adolescence has now, kind of been removed from them. He says it's of varying degrees. Obviously, there are some people that are more reasonable than others, and it can increase. It's something that you can develop. Its location is the heart, and it has a connection with the brain. The last part here, I'm just going to read through this, is what's been titled "Surrender is the Safe Way." He says the safest way is surrender. This is taslim. This is taslim, is what the word is. The faith of whoever does not surrender to Allah and His Messenger and leave that which is ambiguous to the one who knows is not safe. Whoever seeks to know that which is impossible to comprehend and is not satisfied with submission, their aspiration will veil them from pure monotheism, unadulterated gnosis or awareness of Allah, and genuine faith. If you can't at some point just surrender and submit, just say, look, that's beyond my scope as a human being. If you are trying to understand that which cannot be understood, then that drive is going to lead you astray. It's like, I'm going to build a tower until I reach Allah. That aspiration is going to lead you astray. They will waver between affirmation and denial, be riddled with anxiety, erratic, doubtful, divergent, confused, and perplexed. They will not be a sincere believer, a disavowing denier, or a certain inquisitor. Whoever does not avoid negation and comparison here is a nafi, and comparison is tashbih. Has strayed and will not actualize de-anthropomorphism, which we understand to be, ascribing characteristics of creation to Allah. It says, penetrating deep into thought is the means of failure, the stairway to deprivation, the threshold of oppression, and is the stuff of misguidance and bewilderment. To use the intellect is a praiseworthy thing in Islam. Obviously, we've talked about examining, studying, learning. We're talking about evidence and rationale and all those types of things. But there's a limit to it. He's too smart for his own good type of a thing is an actual kind of a principle, if you will, that a person can go astray because they are pushing the envelope too much, too far, if you will. It typically opens the door to confusion and is rare that it is not accompanied with the disappointment, delusion, estrangement, and anger with and avoidance of the Muslim community. When a person goes too far, they push too far intellectually into the unknown, then the result is, it's quite grim, as you can see, as the Imam he puts it. He says, feelings of assurance and despair are what removes one from the religion. For the people of the Qibla, feelings of assurance, okay, here we're basically talking about you feel safe, you're secure. I'm going, I'm min al-mubashirin. I'm saved. And despair, meaning I'm done. I'm going to hell, so whatever, are what removes one from the religion. Like this is excessiveness, this is imbalance. For the people of the Qibla, the way to truth is between the two, between excessiveness and negligence. You can't be overly assured that you're going to be saved, and you cannot be overly or ridden with despair that you're going to hell. You need to be balanced in that, you're hopeful that you will be rewarded and you will be pardoned, and you are worried and fearful that you are sinful and that you will be taken to task. He says comparison and denial, again, in that you compare Allah with His creation, or that you totally deny His attributes, and between compulsion and free will. And this is talking about al-Qadariyya wal-Jabariyya, which are some deviations, early deviations in the Islamic doctrine having to do with al-Qadr. And in closing, the Imam, he has some parting counsel. He says, adhere to the following. The people of prophetic tradition and narration without the people of ideation and innovation, for even a little of that coupled with acumen is an abundance, meaning people of ideation and innovation. This is like, people give precedence to their intellect, and they have a tendency to innovate in their religion. And that's kind of like what the treatise has been all about, is clarifying the truth from the result of that type of person's work in this subject. And that they have, like the big ones that we ran into in here were the Mu'tazila, the big ones like the Rafida, the big ones that gave into Kalam. They went in the wrong direction. So he's saying that a little bit of this ideation, innovation, when you're a very smart person, it's a lot, because it can, just kind of snowball, if you will. Whereas a lot of that coupled with stupidity is only slightly harmful, right? Because people of ideation, people of this intellectual pursuit, if somebody is not at that level, then, they could be swimming in that stuff and they won't really understand what's going on. So it's only slightly harmful. He says excessiveness in going deep is blameworthy, and the aspiration to delve into amusement is a thing of deprivation. Right? These two extremes. Again, going deep at ta'ammuq, this is like excessive, or this is intentional ta'ammuq. You're trying to go too deep. Versus all you want to do is amusement. All you're interested in is play. All you're interested in is entertainment, right? So you can see these are like diametrically opposed. One person is just diving into the depths of intellectualism and philosophy and rhetoric, and the other person is like on the other end of the spectrum, where all they're involved in is frivolity and games. So where's the balance? Right? Islam is about maintaining balance. It says excessive argumentation warrants the enmity of men, spreads turmoil, produces hostility, undermines veneration, and increases failure, leaving the fledgling without resolve. That's like the beginner level student. If that's all they spend their time doing is arguing, then they're not going to master anything. They're not going to have any certainty. And then the expert without a choice. If all they do is argue, then they've built up this position where they no longer have a choice now, because, they're held to this standard of, this is my position and I've argued this thing to death. And now in the event that, hey, wait a minute, you see where that could go. I actually now understand that there's a possibility, or I was wrong, but now I've pushed myself too far. How am I going to come back from that? For verily Allah the Most High is not grasped by understanding and is not conceived by the imagination. It says, adhere to seeking the truth in sincerity, stand by it and do not turn away. Stay away from that which is not necessary, for it will require both your concern and your regret. Seek guidance from what I have given you, for out of compassion I have gone to great lengths to counsel you, and it is most correct and rewarding, most sound and adequate, and Allah is most knowing and wise. This is the last of what we intended regarding a summary of the forebearers' traditional creed. I ask Allah to benefit whoever reads it, listens to it, or peruses it with a good intention, and that He protect us with His munificence and forbearance from every innovative doctrine, and make it sincerely for His noble countenance, which draws near to Him in the gardens of bliss. For indeed, He is the close, the answerer, the forbearing, the merciful. Ameen. May peace and prayers be upon our leader Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his family and companions. All praises for Allah, the Lord of the worlds. And with that, we conclude. Jazakallah khair.